Good evening and a heartfelt welcome to each one of you. I hope you and your loved ones are safe, healthy, and taking good care of each other. In this episode of The Last Clue, we continue our journey through stories that are as mysterious as they are unforgettable. Over time, I've shared many such tales with you, some so strange they make us question what we think we know about the world. There are moments when it's hard to decide whether to believe something or not. But then certain incidents happen, so real, so vivid, that disbelief becomes difficult. Tonight, we step into one such story. The story that raises a question many have pondered but few understand. Does rebirth truly happen? Some people swear by it. Others call it impossible. But what if there's something more to it? Tonight's story takes us to the quiet town of Hexham, England, a place that became the center of one of the most mysterious and widely debated cases of reincarnation in modern history. This is the true story of twin sister and their astonishing rebirth. In this town lived a couple, Florence and John Pollock. Together, they ran a small milk delivery business and worked hard to support their growing family. The Pollocks were parents to 4 boys. Life was busy, but filled with warmth. Then, in 1946, joy arrived in the form of their first daughter. They named her Joanna. 5 years later, in 1951, another daughter was born, Jacqueline. The two sisters, though 5 years apart in age, were inseparable. Life in the Pollock household seemed ordinary, almost idyllic. Since both Florence and John were occupied with their business, the young girls often stayed at home under the care of their loving grandparents. Everything was normal until the day everything changed. Life was moving forward. The girls had started school, and everything seemed normal again. But then came the year 1957, a year that would shatter the Pollock family forever. By then, Joanna was 11 years old, and little Jacqueline was just 6. On the morning of May 5th, 1957, the two sisters left home with a close friend after school. They were walking a familiar path, one they had walked many times before. Their destination, the local church. Raised in a devout Catholic household, the children were often encouraged to attend Mass and live by their faith. That Sunday was no different. The 3 girls strolled along the sidewalk, laughing and talking, completely unaware of what was about to happen. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a speeding car came crashing toward them. In the blink of an eye, all 3 children were struck. Joanna and Jacqueline died instantly at the scene. Their friend, though rushed to the hospital, succumbed to her injuries shortly after. They were just children. Joanna, 11 years; Jacqueline, 6 years. The loss was devastating. The Pollock family was plunged into unimaginable grief. 2 daughters gone in a single moment. It was more than anyone could comprehend. The house, once filled with laughter, now echoed with silence and sorrow. During the police investigation, the driver of the vehicle was identified as a woman named Marjorie. She had a known history of mental illness, and on that tragic day, she had overdosed on a cocktail of prescription drugs. Disoriented and not in full control of her senses, Marjorie had gotten behind the wheel and never even saw the children until it was too late. She was later arrested for the incident, but for the Pollock family, no punishment could undo what had been taken from them. After the accident, justice took a different turn. When Marjorie's medical history was thoroughly reviewed, the courts concluded she was mentally unfit to stand trial. Instead of jail, she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for long-term treatment. But the weight of what she had done seemed to break her spirit. Not long after her admission, Marjorie attempted to take her own life. She was a mother herself, with 2 children of her own. Following the incident, her children were taken from her custody and placed under care, while Marjorie remained confined to a mental health institution, her mind trapped in a prison far worse than any cell. Back in Hexham, the Pollocks were living in a nightmare. Their world had collapsed. Florence and John were shattered. The laughter of Joanna and Jacqueline was gone, and so was the light in their home. But no one felt the loss more deeply than John Pollock. He refused to accept that his daughters were gone. Friends, neighbors, even relatives tried to console the grieving parents. "You have to accept it," they would say. "They're gone." But John couldn't, and neither could Florence. "I don't believe they've left me," she said. "They will come back. You'll see." To outsiders, it seemed like denial, just a mother's desperate hope. But the Pollocks believed it with all their hearts. They said it again and again to anyone who came to mourn. "Our daughters loved us too much to leave us forever. They'll return to us." Somehow, it was a belief, dream, a stubborn hope, but it was also their strength, the only thing that helped them survive the unbearable pain. Months passed, 7, almost 8, and then something unexpected happened. Florence discovered she was pregnant again. Florence was pregnant, but at first there was nothing unusual. The pregnancy seemed normal. The checkups were routine. The doctors found nothing out of the ordinary. The grief from Joanna and Jacqueline's tragic death was still raw, but this pregnancy brought a small ray of hope into the Pollock household. As the months passed, Florence's health remained stable. Every examination suggested she was carrying just one child. The doctors checked again and again. Only one heartbeat could be heard. Nothing suggested otherwise, but fate had something unexpected in store. On October 4th, 1958, exactly 17 months after the death of Joanna and Jacqueline, Florence gave birth. And to everyone's surprise, she delivered not one, but 2 baby girls. Twins. Even the doctor was stunned. "There was only one heartbeat," he said. "There should have been one child." The Pollock family had no history of twins, not on Florence's side, not on John's. This was the first known case of twins being born in their lineage. As the news spread, family, neighbors, even skeptical friends were speechless. John and Florence stood by what they had said from the beginning: God is not so cruel. Our daughters will return. To them, this wasn't just a coincidence. This was something deeper. Still, most people try to rationalize it. Twins can happen, they said. Let's be grateful. And the Pollocks were grateful. These 2 girls brought back joy, laughter, and color to their home. But this was only the beginning of the real story. Soon after the birth, Florence and John began noticing small, yet strange things. One of the twin girls had a very specific birthmark on her forehead, a faint scar-like line. It was hauntingly familiar. Because when Joanna had died in the car crash, she had suffered a wound in the exact same place, a mark on her forehead. John and Florence stared at their newborn in disbelief. How could this be? They wondered. Is this just a mark or something much more? But the mystery didn't end with the birthmarks. As the twin girls began to grow, John and Florence noticed something even more unsettling. Though they were twins, their faces were not identical, something that's uncommon among most twin births. Instead, each child bore an uncanny resemblance to someone else. One looked remarkably like Joanna. The other looked just like Jacqueline. John and Florence were taken aback. They hadn't expected this. But deep inside, they felt something powerful. God took our daughters and has given them back to us. The resemblance was undeniable. But still, they tried to make sense of it rationally. After the original tragedy, friends and family had advised them to leave Hexham, to escape the constant memories of Joanna and Jacqueline, the street corners, the school, the church. So they had moved to a quiet coastal town called Whitley Bay, far from the sorrow-filled streets of Hexham. It was in Whitley Bay that the twins were born in 1958. They named them Jillian and Jennifer. As the years passed, the girls grew up healthy and happy. But at age 4, something happened that changed everything. In 1962, the Pollock family decided it was time to return to Hexham, back to the place where it all began. At first, everything felt normal. But then one day, while the family was out for a walk, a car passed by. Suddenly, both Jillian and Jennifer began screaming, terrified, hysterical. John and Florence were stunned. There was no reason for the outburst, no threat, no danger. But every time a car sped past them, the girls would react the same way, crying uncontrollably, clinging to their parents, trembling with fear. It was then the realization struck them. Could this fear be a memory? The parents began to believe that the trauma from the previous life, the car accident that killed Joanna and Jacqueline, had somehow carried over into the minds of their new daughters. To many, it sounded unbelievable. Rebirth was a concept most dismissed. But to Florence and John, this was no longer a question of belief. They were sure. Their daughters had come back. Somehow they had returned. 4 years had passed. The grief had dulled, but never had disappeared. And then in 1962, the Pollock family made a difficult decision. They returned to Hexham, the place where they had lost Joanna and Jacqueline. They brought with them their new daughters, Jillian and Jennifer. And the moment they stepped into their old home, something inexplicable happened. The twins, who had never been inside that house before, ran straight to one particular bedroom, the one that had once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. They bypassed every other room. Not their parents' room. Not their brothers. Only that one. They jumped onto the bed, laughing, playing, and smiling as if they had come home after a long journey. John and Florence stood frozen. They had never told the girls about their deceased sisters. The twins were far too young, and the parents had deliberately kept the past hidden. But it didn't stop there. Soon after, the girls found their way into a storage room filled with old toys, dolls, blocks, stuffed animals. Toys that had once belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. Without hesitation, the twins began picking specific toys and calling them by names only the deceased girls had known. Not generic names, but the exact nicknames the older sisters had once used. Florence's heart skipped a beat. John turned pale. The toys had never been labeled. No one had told the twins their names. And yet they knew. It was a moment of quiet shock. A moment that turned belief into conviction. The family began to test what the girls knew, gently, without scaring them. They noticed something else. Just like before, whenever a car passed by, the girls would freeze in fear. Sometimes they screamed, sometimes they cried. The trauma of the accident seemed to linger in minds that should remember it. But the most baffling moment was yet to come. On a walk one day, the twins pointed at a school building. "That's our school," they said, smiling and tugging at their parent hands. It was the same school Joanna and Jacqueline had attended. The twins had never been enrolled there. In fact, they had never even visited that part of the town. But they recognized it. Just like they recognized the church, the playground, even the street corner where the accident had occurred. How? No one had told them. No one had guided them. And yet they knew. For John and Florence, there was no doubt anymore. Their daughters had returned. As news of the twins' strange memories spread, the case drew attention far beyond the quiet town of Hexham. Journalists began writing about it. Psychologists, spiritual researchers, even skeptics arrived to see for themselves what was being called one of the most compelling cases of reincarnation ever documented. Investigators questioned the parents extensively. Was it possible they had unconsciously shared stories of the past with the girls? Had the children overheard something? But time and again, the answer was no. The twins had never been told. And yet they knew. Names, places, routines, even private moments only Joanna and Jacqueline could have known. Jillian and Jennifer remember them all. The world watched and all. To many, this wasn't just coincidence. It was a miracle. A true case of rebirth. As time passed, the girls were enrolled in school. Slowly, some of their phobias began to ease. The fear of speeding cars that once made them scream and cry faded little by little. By the time the twins reached adulthood, they still carried fragments of those memories. In 1978, at the age of 20, they were still haunted by the past. Some nights, they'd wake up terrified, trembling from the same recurring nightmare, a speeding car. Headlights, screams, the impact. Their parents would sit with them and gently ask what happened. And again, the same reply. A car was trying to hit us. The trauma from a past life, from a death they had never physically experienced, still lingered. And then something changed. With time, the dreams became less frequent. The vivid memories began to fade. The fear of cars dissolved. The knowledge of Joanna and Jacqueline's lives slowly disappeared, as if washed away by the tide of time. By their early 20s, the girls could no longer remember the things they once recalled with perfect clarity. Their parents were stunned. How could memories so vivid, so specific, just vanish? But they did. Naturally, gradually, completely. The trauma, the dreams, the recognition of people and places, everything faded like a fog lifting. The girls returned to ordinary lives. The past life dissolved into silence. Yet, researchers remain fascinated. Do souls return? Can trauma carry through time? Was this truly a case of reincarnation? To many who study the Pollock Twins, the answer was clear. The place, the memories, the manner of death, it all aligned too perfectly to be dismissed. And so the story of Joanna and Jacqueline and the twins who followed them remains, even today, one of the most chilling and convincing stories of reincarnation the world has ever known. Most people don't believe in reincarnation, at least not in the Western world. In some cultures like ours, the idea of rebirth is deeply rooted in belief systems. But in England, such things are often met with skepticism. That's why so many eyes were on this case, because this story challenged logic. And for a time, it seemed undeniable. But as time moved on, so did life. After their memories began to fade, Jillian and Jennifer grew up, got married, and eventually went their separate ways. Though they were twins, their appearances had never been identical. Their lives followed different paths. Today, they are in their mid-60s, still living in England, with families of their own, husbands, children, and ordinary lives. Lives built upon a story that was, for a time, anything but ordinary. Their parents, John and Florence Pollock, never stopped believing. They had always held on to the hope that their daughter's tragic end would find peace. And they believed, with unshakable faith, that the birth of the twins was no coincidence. It was an answer, a sign, a miracle. From the identical birthmarks, to the knowledge of rooms they'd never seen, the toys they'd never been shown, the fear of cars they'd never been in, there was no other explanation that made sense. Even today, researchers, writers, and spiritual scholars cite the Pollock twins as one of the strongest cases of reincarnation ever recorded in modern history. And that was the strange, haunting, and miraculous story of two sisters who found their way back. That's all for today's story. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never ignore the last clue. Then hit that subscribe button now, because the next tale might just be the one that haunts you forever. Subscribe because the truth won't wait. I'll see you next time with another chilling, unforgettable story. Until then, take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for watching.